When you hear the term deepfake, you might imagine celebrities, like an AI-generated clip of a pop star. But that is not the world teens are living in today. As AI technology has gotten simpler and more sophisticated, young people are encountering AI-generated images of people they know, some of it sexual. And some of these images they're creating themselves. I'm Geoffrey Fowler, Head of Public Engagement with the Youth AI Safety Institute at Common Sense Media. I'm here today with Dr. Supreet Mann, who recently completed a nationally representative survey of teens about AI-generated sexual content. And I'm here with Dr. Kellen Glinder, a longtime pediatrician in Silicon Valley, who is also a member of Common Sense Media's Advisory Council. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Supreet, you conducted our first survey of teens about pornography in their lives back in 2023. What did you learn from that, and what made you want to investigate it again so quickly?
Yeah, our first report on teens and pornography, which was published in early 2023, really focused on what I would consider more traditional types of online pornography. So teens accessing OnlyFans, or maybe sending and sharing of curated or commercial types of pornography from their smartphones. What we didn't explore that time that we wanted to explore this time was AI generation of sexually explicit images. This was really not a conversation we were having in 2023 about AI, and it's exploded so much, and the prevalence of deepfakes has really come into the everyday tech use of young people that we felt like this was a topic that was really worthy of exploring at this particular time. So what we really looked at here was AI-generated sexual content. So this can include certainly generated pornography, but it can also include things like deepfakes or images made using nudification apps, undressing apps. So what this can include is images of celebrities, images of characters, but also images of peers and young people sharing and creating these images of their peers.
So what did you learn in your newest survey? What surprised you?
So what we learned is that young people are creating and sharing these images at higher rates than we might expect.
Like what?
So 44% of young people have seen this type of content. So not talking about creating, sharing yet, but just have seen this type of content. And for many of them, this exposure has been accidental. So only about 12% of teens said that they are only intentionally seeking out content, but 62% said that they've been exposed unintentionally. And these rates are not that different for boys and girls. So the exposure rates for those who have seen AI-generated sexual content in the past week when we asked them this question, about a third of both boys and girls said that they had seen that content. 1 in 5 young people said that they are creating this content themselves or know someone who has created this content. And of those, 63% said that the content depicted either themselves or someone that they know personally. And when it comes to sharing, a quarter of teens have either sent or shared this content themselves. And this is often happening on social media, group chats, direct messages, and even over gaming platforms.
So what I'm hearing is deepfakes are not just a sort of a theoretical concern for kids. It's a personal one. They're experiencing it in their lives, and many of them are creating it themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And it's happening in online spaces and places that young people are spending their time.
So they're not going to dark corners of the internet to exchange deepfakes of whoever. This is like in the text message thread?
Yeah, I mean, 82% said that they had encountered this content on social media platforms like TikTok, Instagram, X, right? But they're also coming across it in a lot of different ways. About a fifth to a quarter said that they had experienced it via direct text messages or group messages. And 14% are experiencing this on gaming platforms. So places that young people are spending a lot of time online are places where they're being exposed to this content, whether intentionally or accidentally.
Now, a quick question about something that might be on people's minds. This was a survey where you ask teens to self-report. Should we trust what they told us here?
Look, there's always some limitations with survey research. I think the biggest limitation when we think about sensitive topics like this is the potential for young people to underreport. They know this is a taboo topic. They may be a little bit weary to really talk about the reality of the experiences that they're having because they recognize that it might raise alarms for adults in their lives. So I think we can, and of course, this is a very large survey of a lot of kids, so we do have some generalizability there, but I think if anything, we're probably seeing underreport. And we did also, for the purposes of this report, we had focus groups of young people as well to reflect on the survey findings. So to talk about whether this was reflective of what they thought was happening in their real lives, happening with their peers, and young people overwhelmingly thought that this was pretty accurate or an underreport. So again, I think we have a lot of reliability in the findings that we're having based both on the large scale of the survey, but also on the young people who were able to chime in directly.
Kellen, I want to bring you into this conversation. You're a longtime pediatrician. Hearing the data about how prevalent these AI apps are in the lives of young people, are you surprised? Is this what you're hearing about in the clinic? Are you hearing about it from parents? Are you hearing about it from kids when the parents aren't there?
Well, as a pediatrician in Silicon Valley, I would say I'm of two minds of this. From the pediatric perspective, this is part of the wallpaper of being a child in Silicon Valley. Kids are surrounded by digital media of all kinds, and they get exposed and begin to master some degree of how to manage their own exposure well before the adults know. And I think that's what this survey points to. It's shocking to hear these numbers as an adult, as a pediatrician, as somebody who advocates for children in Silicon Valley, as somebody who talks to kids alone without their parents and asks them about bullying. These numbers are totally shocking. At the same time, I think that that's a gross underreporting. It's difficult when you're talking about nudification. That's a new word for me. When you're talking about nudification, the children that I see would know what that word means and feel it right away. But I think it's more bullying. I think that it's more indicative of bullying, and accessing this with my pediatric population from the front door is a little bit difficult. If I were to ask people about, have they created deepfakes? Have they created nude images of peers? Most would say no, I would imagine. If I asked about what they are seeing amongst their friends or their peers, I would get a lot of people engaged in that conversation. Most children that I see have some exposure to this in some way. And in many ways, they have knowledge that the adults around them don't have.
Do we have any theories or data that indicates why kids are making this kind of content? Is it bullying? Is it curiosity? Is it flirtation? Why is it happening?
I don't have any data on that. I will tell you my intuition on this. Children are always trying to gain control. It's a part of human development. You could take a 2-year-old, you can take a 14-year-old, and parenting children is a balance between giving that control and balancing that with accountability. And here we have a situation where kids have a lot of access and a lot of control in manipulating these images, and they have no accountability or very little. And that creates a problem.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's also a developmental aspect of sort of sexual exploration and curiosity that's really emerging. And when you kind of pair that with a really frictionless experience of being able to input these images and have them be undressed by the app, that's kind of like just really ramping up for these sorts of problems to emerge without thinking through the consequences because it is so frictionless.
Do you feel, though, that it is on some level different from older forms of sexual bullying, like a real photo or a rumor spread online? There's something about a notification app, the speed of it, the ease of it, change the dynamic?
Yeah, this did emerge a little bit in the research where young people would feel sort of a lack of agency around this. This emerged in some of the one-on-one conversations and focus groups that we had with young people, where there was this sense of I'm nervous about my online presence because my images may be used in unintended ways. And I think that fear is very real. It's sort of this, I didn't put this image out there. I never asked for this to happen. And suddenly it's being used in these really unintended ways, and the consequences can be really dramatic.
Legally, policy-wise, in governance, we're not dealing with these consequences. They are out there and they can exist, but we have no ability to really handle them until they happen. If you're 15, how can we expect a 15-year-old to imagine those possible consequences? They're in over their heads. And I think a lot of these exposures point that out, and kids get nervous about that. At some level, they know we shouldn't be able to do this. I thought one interesting fact in the research was the amount of children that thought this should be illegal. It was a vast majority of kids questioned thought the capability to generate these deepfakes should be illegal. Right there, that was the headline to me in the study. Like, what are we doing? We have a society where we're unleashing this power and a population of people that are using it, and they don't want that power. And they're currently unsupervised. If that's not a call to action, I don't know what is.
Do kids have the right understanding about the implications, the impact of making deepfakes? What did you see when you researched that?
I don't think they do. We asked young people about how they perceived of this type of content by asking them if they thought this was sort of more or less harmful than real porn. And what they did say, about a quarter of the young people felt like this was less harmful because it doesn't use real people and not real circumstances, right? And so I think while an overwhelming majority of them did want to see this type of content made illegal because they recognize this sort of agency component is really important and that's lacking here, there were also a good chunk of kids who don't view this through the same lens that they do view traditional pornography. So I think there is sort of this disconnect. I think there's a little bit of a miscommunication here between the adults in their lives and the young people.
Let's talk about the parenting aspect of that then. So the survey shows only 20% of kids say that they've ever had a conversation with a parent about AI-generated sexual content, but they would like to, if it could happen in a way where they weren't being judged. So I guess, doctor, write a prescription for the parents here. How do you have a conversation with your kids about this?
It's a very good question. These are delicate conversations. For any parents that are interested in having these conversations, I would say avoid the threat words. Right? A threat word, sex, pornography, maybe even bullying. Those are going to make a child recoil and not disclose what they know. And then what I often say is come in through the side door, not the front door. What do you see? What's in your community? What have you heard about? And start the conversation there. Warm up to the idea of what do you do, or how do you access this, or how do you manage this when you see it? And be very curious. As a parent, it's hard for us to understate how much our kids predict what we do. Our children are great understanders of how we act. And so they're already guessing in those conversations what my mom's going to say, what my dad's going to say, what my mom's thinking, what my dad's thinking. So when you think it, just hold on to it. Keep it inside and be quiet about that. Use that as a guide to actually ask your child creatively and openly, what do they think?
And I know sometimes as parents, we can be a little nervous to start these conversations, but one of the really interesting findings from the report was that for the younger kids in the survey, so the 13 and 14-year-olds, more than half of them indicated that they would be open to having a conversation with their parents about this disturbing content. That number dropped to closer to a third for the older kids. So this kind of suggests there might be a unique window of opportunity for younger kiddos and really kind of having these conversations early. So often we wait and we let these conversations be reactive rather than proactive. But if we kind of get kids maybe even before they've been exposed, or at least as they're younger and more willing to to talk to their parents, this might be an opportunity for us to have these conversations early, at least show kids that we are open to doing the difficult work here.
Supreet, that's a great point. I would just add that if a teen is reluctant or a parent is reluctant to bring this up with a teen and the conversation hasn't been had yet, one way to play on that a little bit might be for a parent to say, what do you think about young kids being exposed to this? Mm-hmm. And get that teenager's more adult view on how to protect other people. In that way, a parent is asking the kid to be a collaborator in the solution rather than this antagonistic relationship of I'm parenting you and I'm telling you what to do. Instead, how would you manage this if you had a younger brother? How would you manage this with a younger niece or a nephew? And it's a way to get in there and really respect that teen's autonomy and how they're trying to navigate the world.
Going back to our conversation about consequences. So imagine if you're trying to talk to your teenager about this. Maybe someone in their school got caught making a deep fake. Maybe they got caught making a deep fake. And they say to you, the kid says to you, hey, it was just a joke. It wasn't real. How do you respond to that? Like, what do you say? How can you explain why it still has an impact?
I'd unpack that question a little bit. I don't think it's as effective to explain something like that to a teenager. It's just going to turn their ears off. Rather, take what they give you and explore it to its natural endpoint. Well, why would this be good? Why would this be bad? They'll give you a relatively basic answer. Well, what happens then? And then what happens then? And what would this person think? And what would that person think? And keep following that logic. And usually you can expand a teen's perspective to the point where they'll open the world and open their eyes into that empathic position of, oh, now I can understand. Maybe this could hurt people, or maybe down the road it could hurt me. And I think that's a much more useful process for a teenager rather than to be told what their parents want them to do.
Yeah, and I do think that young people understand the impact that this type of content is having on their peers. About 2/3 of all the young people in our survey said that they think AI-generated sexual content is changing how their peers think about bodies, relationships, intimacy. So it's having this, there is this perception from young people that it is changing how their peers are thinking about things like sexual consent and what it means to be in a relationship. So really kind of foundational parts of that teen experience, they do understand that that's being impacted in some ways by the introduction of this type of content in the kind of like their lives.
I think that's a great point. And I would add just adult humility to that, in that this didn't exist 5 years ago. So what ramifications any images have 5 years from today, we don't know. We as adults, we as a society can imagine, but what happens to a 15-year-old who made this content, or a 15-year-old who was depicted in this content, who's applying for a job at 45? That's never happened in the world. We won't know what that ramification truly is for another 30 years, right? And so being open to that and actually having that conversation can really expand the conversation, I think, a little bit, and expand kids' perspective on, oh yeah, I'm not just worried about consequences next week or next month, but how might this affect my career or my family when I start having children?
And I think that curiosity is so important for adults to kind of have when it comes to having these conversations with their kids. We have a quotation in the report, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically it's a young person from one of our focus groups who said, we're growing up as AI is growing. Our parents did not have that experience, right? And I think there's something really valuable there in knowing what we know, but also knowing what we don't know, and really trying to learn from the young people in our lives about what they're experiencing.
It's such an important point, because we know what life was like without this. We can imagine a life without AI. Many of us at this table can imagine what life was like without an iPhone or even without an internet. My children are adults. They can't imagine a life without an internet. The kids we're talking about in this study probably can't imagine a life without AI-generated deepfakes. And so it's very hard for them to know the counter argument. What does that feel like? Well, what's it doing to me? Well, I don't have a control to say that this is how it would feel without it. This is just wallpaper at this point.
Are there any signals in the research or clinical experience of the impact that deepfakes are having on the mental health of kids? Are there signals about how they're changing their behaviors, their relationships because of the threat of it?
Yeah, about 2/3 of teens in our survey were scared of being depicted in this type of content without their consent. And we also asked teens about whether this fear was leading them to change any of their online behaviors, and many of them indicated that it was. So making their public profiles private, or maybe even removing online social media profiles, sort of limiting images, being more careful about what they're sending and receiving. And on the one hand, you can look at this as like, oh, well, that's kind of good, maybe, that they're thinking critically about their online experiences. But on the other hand, we don't want that to come from this place of deep fear that their images can be used in these unintended ways. So I think there's like really important notes about how to help young people manage this space, but also we shouldn't be putting the burden on the young people, right? I mean, there's clearly a larger systems level problem here that we really need to be diving into, but I'll save that for another day.
Close out this conversation, I have a question for each of you. What's the role of the medical community in addressing this and of society at large?
I think the role of the medical community is enormous, and it's unrealized at present. This is moving so quickly, and things in medicine, generally speaking, move very slowly. For good reason. There's all kinds of barriers and obstacles of proof that we're used to in the medical world, used to clear in the medical world before we adopt a new strategy or a new therapy. None of these things are waiting for that. This is all being deployed, and I think the medical community writ large is trying to understand what happened 2 or 3 years ago, let alone a survey like this. It will be different in 6 months. This is not going to be less in 6 months. This is going to be more in 6 months. And so the medical community needs to understand it and start advocating as quickly as possible. I am very thankful for the work that Common Sense Media does, because I think Common Sense Media can move very quickly in a lot of these spaces compared to a lot of medical organizations that are used to moving more slowly.
And Supreet, talking directly to parents here, what's one message you want them to get out of this research, or one finding that you think they are not aware of but should be?
I have a feeling a lot of these findings are going to come as a surprise to a lot of parents, because I think this is just such a new topic and something that parents don't have a great pulse on, that they are just not going to realize how often their kids are being exposed. But I think one thing that emerges from this is that unintentional exposure piece. So often we think, well, my kid would never seek this out. My kid would never create this. But that doesn't mean that your kid isn't receiving this or isn't being exposed unintentionally, algorithmically. So I think that's really important, is highlighting that unintentional exposure is happening for a lot of these kids. Remember, for those who have been exposed, it was over half have been exposed unintentionally. So what we really need to be doing is just having these conversations. I think having these conversations, talking about what their experiences are like and the experiences of their peers is really, really just key.
Supreet and Kellen, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today. This sort of research is exactly why we started the Youth AI Safety Institute here at Common Sense Media, to shed light into how this technology is really rapidly changing the lives of kids. And to our audience, if you'd like to read the full report or learn more about our work in AI, point your web browser to institute.commonsense.org. Thank you.